Welcome. I'm Marty Goldenson in for Brian Lehrer. The presidential election is less than 2 weeks away. It's not just the economy, stupid, that will decide who wins. The Census Bureau says that 10 million more women than men voted in 2008. And though the economy is the #1 issue for both genders, for countless women, the choice is also about choice. A Romney court could overturn Roe versus Wade. Healthcare and education are also high on the list of women's priorities. According to the Pew Research Center, we'll discuss all of this in a moment. Also tonight, gun control. Mayors lobby for it. Police even are for it as well. How come it is political suicide to raise it? Plus, we'll examine the test, the entrance exam for New York's elite high schools. Does it exclude the best and the brightest minority kids? And today we'll find out how to text like a Navy SEAL. It's a controversial app to encrypt your conversations so Big Brother can't snoop on you. And later we'll ask you to help in our crowdsourcing project about ATM fees. First though, women and the election. Having failed to dig us fully out of unemployment, that abyss, President Obama will doubtless lose millions of votes that he got from women last time. He bettered John McCain by about 14% among women last time. But on the other hand, Mitt Romney might fall into the gender gap. Reproductive rights advocates leading the push. Joining us, one of those advocates, the president of NARAL Pro-Choice New York, Andrea Miller. NARAL Pro-Choice fights for birth control, sex education, healthy pregnancies, and the right to choose an abortion. Journalist Akiba is also here. She writes the blog Gender Matters at colorlines.com. Widely published, she is co-editor of the essay collection Naked Black Women Bear All, about their skin, lips, hips, and other parts. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
Andrea, let me start with you. I understand that NARAL Pro-Choice is trying to figure out which women who voted for Obama might be thinking about defecting to Mitt Romney, and you're going to try to find them and steer them back into the fold. First of all, how do you find this group? Where do you think they are? Who are they?
Well, we've looked at, NARAL Pro-Choice America has looked at 25 swing counties in the country and done some very sophisticated analysis, as well as some direct polling and focus groups to try to get a sense of who are those women. I mean, as you said in your introduction, the last election was very much a gender gap election, that both the larger numbers of women voting and the larger proportion that went for the president was decisive. And if you were to have the snapshot today, you're talking about a difference of anywhere from 4 to 5 points, lesser in terms of the direction women are trending toward the president right now.
Right, these aren't solid, Democrats you would find in the city. These are probably, what, white working moms in the Ohio suburbs?
That's one good example. In fact, there's an ad up right now in the suburbs in Columbus.
To pick a random state.
Right, well, and not a random state at all, because obviously, as everyone knows, Ohio is a very critical battleground and swing state in this election.
Akiba, do you think that women, even those who voted for Obama 4 years ago, do you think that they understand or get what this election is possibly about in terms of Roe versus Wade and other issues?
I think women do. I mean, I think that the Republican Party has actually done such a great job of making this a central issue of the election that at this point, I think that, it's one of those talking points that just keeps coming up. And it's interesting now because we see the Romney-Ryan campaign to a certain extent trying to backpedal a great deal of what they've been saying for the past year or more. And so I definitely think that this is on the radar for women. Right.
When you say backpedaling, you mean the advertisements that are out there saying that Romney is in favor of abortion for 2 exceptions or 3?
Yes, exactly. And I mean, that's technically it's not a backpedaling in that Romney has never, to my knowledge, and you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, he's never, to my knowledge, come out and said that he is opposed to and would outlaw abortion in the case.
Right, he's different than his running mate, Ryan.
Right.
Well, you knew this man back from when you were at NARAL in Massachusetts,
Yes,
right?
I was.
So
I have a lot of familiarity with Romney's record.
So tell us.
First of all, the most important thing to know is what is he saying right now? And what he's saying is not only what comes out in these ads, but it's when he says directly, I think Roe versus Wade was wrongly decided. I would want to see it overturned. This U.S. Supreme Court is very closely divided. It is literally one justice away
We're
from
with
an
4
outright...
judges over the age of 70, I believe.
That's right, absolutely. And some of them, some of the staunchest believers in the precedent of Roe versus Wade, which is not only about safe legal abortion and recognizing our constitutional right to privacy, but one of my favorite justices of all time, Justice Sandra Day O'Connor in 1992, in upholding Roe in a landmark, very, very divided decision, said that Roe was important because generations of women have been able to participate more fully in the economic, social, and political life of this nation because they can make decisions about their reproductive lives. And that is not only a women's issue, that is an economic issue, that is a family issue. We heard the president say that about contraception. That's true about any of the panoply of concerns around reproductive health and rights in this election.
Yeah,
and the bottom line is, you can't say you're going to overturn Roe versus Wade and at the same time even claim that you would outlaw abortions in cases of life, rape, or incest, because the reality is it would kick it back to the states, and there are plenty of states out there already that have passed outright abortion bans that have worked their way to the Supreme Court over the years and been slammed back because of Roe. You have no Roe, that's no longer true. You have at least half the states could immediately outlaw all abortions without exception.
No, already universal access is not there, right?
Yes.
You tell us about, you took a trip to Texas to do a story.
Yes,
I
did.
noticed on your blog. Tell us that story and whether it's typical of what's happening in some areas of the country.
Well, what I'll say is that Texas is always a very interesting place. So I'm not going to say that Texas is typical of everyone. Right. But Texas has been rated at the very bottom by the federal government's the organization that ranks healthcare systems around the country. Texas has the #1 rate of people who are uninsured throughout the country. And part of the reason why that's the case is because Texas has such stiff Medicaid requirements. And Texas had a huge problem, budgetary and otherwise, with Medicaid-funded births. It came up with a couple of different ways to handle this. One way that they've handled it is to have a lot of uninsured and poor women rely on Medicaid-funded family planning. They have also created a Medicaid waiver program called the Women's Health Program that covered women who weren't poor enough for Medicaid, but also women who were not pregnant already, which is pretty much what you have to be to qualify for Medicaid. At any rate, what we've seen in Texas, particularly within the last election year, has just been a serious defunding and also a serious restriction of the number of family planning clinics that can actually serve poor women. And most of these women are Latina women.
Right now, if Planned Parenthood gets defunded, I don't know whether how much that will hurt them. I don't know what percentage of their funds.
Certainly,
extraordinarily, it'd be just a huge blow because they're such a backbone.
Oh, sure. I mean, there are 800
sector.
clinics or something. But I mean, I don't know what percentage of their funding comes from the federal government.
I don't have those numbers in front of me.
But it's huge, I believe.
Well, most importantly, it's the funding for those really critical reproductive health care services and preventive care services. And they are one of the most important providers of those services.
And that's practically a pledge that we hear.
Absolutely.
Right.
Romney
Romney actually said, we're going to defund. One of the ways that we're going to balance the budget is that we're going to cut out Title X programs for abortion providers like Planned Parenthood. We've seen in Texas, again, a change in the rules for their women's health program, where before the changes happened in 2011, Planned Parenthood actually provided 40% of that reproductive health care under that program. And so when you take Planned Parenthood out, which they've actually been taken out thanks to revised rules that I feel are politically motivated, now you just have whole swaths of people, particularly in rural areas, that cannot access the same level of reproductive health care. And we're not talking about abortions. We're talking about pap smears, clinical breast exams, free or low-cost birth control, referrals for mammograms.
But it makes me wonder, as you list them, it makes me wonder whether people are saying, some women voters are saying, or any voters, oh, that's too radical. He wouldn't change all that. He's not really Ryan. He put him on the, he's got a record that is more amorphous than that. He changes his mind a lot anyway. I'm not worried about it. I want to have this guy in because of jobs, and we'll see how it plays out. When you hear that argument?
I have to say the bottom line, and we've seen this in our polling even in New York State, where you might think that voters wouldn't be as nervous because it is such a staunchly pro-choice state. It led the charge in the 1970s, was one of the first states to legalize abortion. You would think that people even here might not be nervous, might not believe that this right is at risk, might not be worried about access to these services, but it is not only high on their area of concern, it's a motivating voting factor for them. And I think, you look, recent Gallup poll says that I believe it was 39% of women in swing states have said that this issue is the issue for them, is a top
that's
issue,
a big number.
if not literally the top issue. I have been doing this work for 20 years. I've never seen numbers like that before.
Really? Because, I was reading this Pew study that I quoted a few times in the introduction, and it looked to me like, the top issue for women generally in the high 80s, even more than for men, oddly enough, was the economy.
But
Well,
the
I think
economy,
it's not
this is
different.
an
This is
economic
right.
issue.
That's right.
This is an economic issue.
I think that's so important. Look,
And, yeah.
whether it's a basic pocketbook question of can I afford this versus that, can I get contraception, can I get my preventive care, what happens to me and my family if I don't, whether it's an unintended pregnancy and the implications for my family.
That kind of economics.
That kind of
because
yes.
it's definitely
Absolutely.
economics. The bottom line is any woman who has been without a job and has to access health care and has to get regular health care understands that this is a pocketbook issue.
Absolutely.
And it radiates throughout her entire family. And so the idea, this isn't just about pregnancy. This is about cervical cancer prevention.
Absolutely.
And this is about not having to go to emergency care and spending $2,500 for an exam that you could have gotten.
Waiting. You could go to the emergency room to get your care. It means if you have a job that you don't have
you're missing,
flexibility,
or you get paid by the hour.
That's right.
Or
so these are very fundamental. I really think that one of the things that's so striking about this election is that we have had historically times when there were sort of the social issues over here and the economic or the, sort of those soft issues, and then you have those harder issues over here. There is such an intersection right now, and it's about the role of women in our society right now. It's about the role of women as breadwinners. It's about their responsibilities to their family and their children and the increased sort of intensity of that in light of the economy. You overlay that with saying, we're not going to let you make these fundamental decisions that indicate whether your health is going to be at risk or going to be protected, that determine whether or not what size your family is going to be, that allow you to make judgments about those very core things that truly shape our lives. You betcha that's an economic
It's
issue.
interesting you put it that way. One of our producers in this program, who's far younger than me, cannot quite understand why in this age, why at this time,
Talking about
where
birth control.
women are, ahead of men in education and going into med school and writing books about how they're sort of on top now. At the same time, this is going on. The rise of there is all this, debate about
this is actually-
control.
It makes
how are those
sense.
related?
I think
how
they
does
do
it make
relate.
sense?
Yeah.
Go ahead,
go ahead,
to
Akiba.
those
How does it
very-
make
I
sense?
think you're
I
absolutely
think it's a backlash to the very advances that your producer was talking
It's
about.
about control. You mean.
I do think it's about
about an
control, and I
insecure
think it's
sense of
about
insecurity.
nostalgia. I think it's about the good old days when, America was so great. We're going to return to the family. And I also think that there's sort of a correlation between people who value these, who say that they are for family values, right? And then on the other hand, you just have, I don't have a better way to say it, but you have an ignorance about basic reproductive health, right? And so it's very easy to wrap a lot of these things into a family values, and that's related to abortion and contraception. If you don't understand the basics of how a woman's body works, for me, one of the things that makes me angry as a columnist is just sort of the cavalier attitude that some lawmakers have shown about, again, the basic function of a woman's body.
Well, we
And
do
I
know
often,
that the women's body can shut down if a woman.
well,
Yeah,
exactly.
there
I
you
mean,
go.
and so you know,
that we've known that for years.
this is a, yeah, this is a
Check
member.
that
This
box.
is a member
Done.
of the science committee. You know,
Yeah, which
so
is
it's
terrifying,
So it's just
truly.
this sort of this cavalier attitude, like, oh, you can kind of just go without that. You don't really need that.
And
Or
how
women
is that ignorance about the women's body, how is that connected to that larger issue, the family values issue?
I believe that it's a willful ignorance. I think that when you are dismissive of science, I think when you look at everything through the lens of what you deem to be values, your values, and what you deem to be your interpretation of your religion, then the devil becomes, you know, the devil is in the details, but you don't care about the details because you're really
I
about
get it.
family values.
Well, this leads me
Quote, unquote.
to this question. I all the time read different numbers about how many women in this country are pro-choice and how many are not. Some say 50-50, some
Right,
say
well,
70%
right.
of women.
Depends on how you ask the question, which is always, speaking of the devil being in the details.
Well, you would have to
Look,
know this for your organization
you
to
do,
know
and
what
I
you're
can
working
tell you
for.
that there are consistent trends. There's been a lot of talk about changes in these values. The bottom line is, if you look all the way back to 1972 and you ask the question about whether people believe that abortion should be safe and legal and accessible to women, you see a consistent majority in the mid to high 50 percentiles at least, and with big jumps in certain states, obviously, like New York. What you've seen changes in is the sort of monikers that people might place on themselves. There was a whole kerfuffle, fewer people call themselves pro-choice anymore. The reality is, it doesn't matter what people call themselves. What matters is what are their values. And there has not been a shift. You can look at the Gallup polls, you can look at any of the polls. There has not been a significant shift in any way on the core belief that these decisions are best left to women and their doctors, that these are private matters, and the majority of Americans believe that, and they have for decades. They've had for the 4 decades that Roe's been the law of the land, or nearly 4 decades, and hopefully they won't be electing a president, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure that doesn't happen, who disagrees with them.
Finally, we have only 30 seconds left, but the very beginning of this conversation, you said this has become an issue that we've talked about, these women's rights issues and economic issues, because the Republicans have made it so.
Yes.
And I wanted to ask you a question. If they had not made it so, if things were sort of as you would probably more like them to be about other issues, what are the issues that should be out there? What's being crowded out by a discussion of who has power over women's bodies?
Well, number one, I think a truly meaningful discussion about jobs. I think that we need to be talking about drone warfare. I think we need to be talking about mass incarceration. I think we need to be talking about police brutality. I think that we need to talk about just the growing economic inequity. So there are a range of
Actually,
issues.
so there's really no other agenda you had in mind at all.
No,
just from drones to poverty. I get it.
Yeah, I mean,
Thank you both very much for
Thank
coming.
you.
This is a very interesting discussion. Up next, why is gun control political suicide? Over the course of one weekend in Chicago this past summer, 9 people were killed and 46 wounded by gunfire. In Aurora, Colorado, moviegoers found themselves at the mercy of a lone gunman who killed 12 and wounded 58. About 12,000 people die each year from violence with guns. But the president and his opponent do not raise this issue much. Gun control was addressed for a few minutes in the town hall presidential debate. How come? Why is gun control a political hot potato when so many citizens and mayors and our own mayor and even some police want more gun control? Longtime activist Josh Horwitz has some hard-earned thoughts on this. 20 years of work on gun control. He's executive director of the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence and joins us via Skype from Virginia. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, Marty, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Good. Does it matter when you go into the voting booth 13 days from now, in terms of gun control, which lever you pull?
Well, obviously, it depends where you are. If you're in the national election, it matters an awful lot. Barack Obama has not been perfect on this. I wish he would take a more vocal position on this. but he's done some things that have been helpful for us.
Such as?
Well, he's actually been helpful on some mental health issues. He's been helpful on trying to get on the southwest border, trying to get these assault weapons part of the reporting requirements that get sent to ATF. Like, for instance, right now, guns that are involved in a multiple sale get sent to ATF. Obama's passed a regulation to have that done for assault weapons on the southwest border. He's been helpful in getting more money into the National Instant Check system. He's in ways he's tried to prevent the NRA from doing a lot worse.
It doesn't sound dramatic changes. What would have you liked to see him do?
Well, look, I would have liked, he's come out and said they want to support an assault weapons ban. Obviously,
that would be reviving the one that's expired, right?
Exactly. And obviously, you'd like to see that done with more vigor. And we know that after the Tucson shooting, there's been a review in the administration about what to do. I would like that. I would have liked that to be done a lot faster. And I think some of the things that could have been done are obvious. I mean, banning assault weapons, banning high-capacity magazines.
Let me break in for a second. Some people have said that part of the reason Al Gore lost the election years ago was that was the backing the assault weapons ban. Is that true or myth?
Well, so I think that's myth. I think it's myth, and I think there's been a number of really good analysis of this recently that show that's purely myth, and also that the NRA's power, quote unquote, is a myth. The Center for American Progress did an excellent study on this recently, and I tell people to go look at that on their website. That was done by two researchers, one Republican and one.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but what is that's fascinating. You say their power is a myth. Are we still living by the myth of that power?
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, I think we're definitely living by that myth. In a close election, I think that they can move a very small percentage of the vote. For instance, in the Gore election, there's a lot of discussion about West Virginia and Tennessee. But what we know now, it's pretty clear, is that West Virginia and Tennessee were moving in the Republican ranks. Now, of course, those states have nothing to do with guns, but are clearly Republican, and that race was just sort of the harbinger of a realignment. And there's a lot of environmental issues going on in West Virginia at the time. So, Al Gore, I think, one of the things that I think Al Gore did poorly in that race is when he had a question about guns, even though he had a good record on it, he dodged it. And I think one of the problems for Al Gore was the inauthenticity, because people knew where he stood on these things. So,
well, let me break in here again, because speaking of dodging,
yes.
The debate before the international debate, a question was asked of both candidates about the matter of gun control.
Yeah.
And I just want to play about 25 seconds of the beginning of the president's answer.
Yes.
And get your reaction to it.
Yes.
So my belief is that, A, we have to enforce the laws we've already got, make sure that we're keeping guns out of the hands of criminals, those who are mentally ill. We've done a much better job in terms of background checks, but we've got more to do when it comes to enforcement. But I also share your belief that weapons that were designed for soldiers in war theaters don't belong on our streets.
Well, there it is. That reinforces, does it not, what you were saying about Romney not backing this list, right?
Well, look, the problem for Mitt Romney is that when he was governor of Massachusetts, he was enthusiastically a supporter of banning assault weapons. Now, as president, he's backed away from that, and he's made up a whole bunch of reasons. He said there was a compromise with the local gun lobby in Massachusetts and gun violence prevention activists. That's just not true. The record is very clear that Mitt Romney went against the wishes of gun owners in the state to do that. Now he's reinvented himself as an NRA champion. And that's really his problem with all of these different issues. He's, with choice and everything else, he's just a chameleon on these things. And I think the same way that Al Gore had a problem with this because he was inauthentic, I think Mitt Romney's going to have a problem on this as well. And I think people see through this, and it adds to the sort of discussion about Mitt Romney as a complete flip-flopper. I think for Obama, we've always known where he has been on this, and I think he's been true to that position. It's just that he needs to get more serious about it. He needs to take a leadership position on it. That's our problem with Obama. Mitt Romney is you have no idea what he actually believes at core, and so as you know, being electing someone like that, you just run the risk of having no idea what they believe on enforcement. On one issue, on new laws, will they start repealing laws that are on the books? For instance, how will Romney deal with DC's gun laws? Because the NRA is always intent on repealing those. Does he favor them? Is he against them? We just don't know, and I think that's sort of the problem with Mitt Romney in general, the Etch-a-Sketch type of moments. We just don't know what he believes.
You were saying before that the NRA is not as powerful as one might think. In your work to try to reform gun laws and have more gun control, and then who are you up against that does have power? How have you redirected your efforts? Is the NRA still the target?
Well, look, the NRA, don't get me wrong, the NRA has a lot of perceived power. In Washington, that matters. So I think you need to, I think the question is, the first part was, can they actually swing elections? The answer is very rarely. But will politicians try to appease them because they have perception of power? Absolutely. So, for instance, I think it's very important, for instance, in 2010, where Jerry Connolly in a swing district in Virginia went, head-to-head on the gun issue with the NRA's candidate and won in a very close election. The last week of the campaign was dominated by blunders by his opponent about firearms, and part of that was he actually had to talk about them. And voters, when you learn that you're against background checks, most voters are for background checks. Most voters are for assault weapons bans. Most NRA members support background checks. So if you get the candidates talking about that, I think the advantage is to the person who supports the positions we have. I'm always sort of amazed in these races when politicians have winning positions on firearms but are afraid to exercise them. And I think that's really sort of that's where the NRA's perception of power comes in. But when you punch a bully in the nose and you call it out and say, look, is it right that you want guns on campus? Is it right that you want to get rid of states' concealed carry laws? Is it right that you really don't want background checks at gun laws? Those things, background checks at gun shows, when you start enunciating these issues clearly, the NRA candidate starts running. And, those positions are wildly unpopular in most places around the country.
I appreciate your running down just what we need to know. Thanks for your time. We're out of time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Up next, are the elite high schools in New York City getting the best and the brightest, or the best and the lightest? It's known simply as the test, and thousands of the city's smartest kids are cramming for it as we speak. Beginning Saturday, nearly 30,000 8th and 9th graders will take the multiple choice exam required for entry to one of the city's 8 elite public high schools. In all, those high schools admit 5,000 students each year, but on the basis of just one thing, a single 2.5-hour exam, the test. Is that fair? A coalition of civil rights and education groups don't think so. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund recently filed a federal complaint with the Department of Education charging the test discriminates against blacks and Latino students. By way of example, the complaint says that of the 967 8th graders offered admission to Stuyvesant High School last year, just 19 were African American, 32 Latino. To what extent is the test to blame? With us, Damon Hewitt of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and attorney Renée Eubanks. She is also an alumna of Stuyvesant and part of a group that helps minority students prep for this test. Welcome. Thanks for coming here.
Thank you.
So what is this complaint exactly, and why'd you file it?
Well, we filed this complaint because we've spoken with advocates all throughout the city who have spent years, sometimes dozens of years, helping to prepare students for this specialized high school's exam. But what they found is that the lack of representation hasn't gotten better over the years, it's actually gotten worse, in particular in the last decade or so. What they realized is that it's time for a real paradigm shift. They were further disturbed by what we discovered during our investigation, which is this. It turns out this test actually doesn't have any predictive validity. And what that means is a fancy term to say that the test doesn't actually predict who will succeed in these high schools. And we know that the policy itself doesn't look backwards to consider all of the hard work students have done in grades K through 8. In fact, it's possible that a student could have straight A's from K through 8, and that doesn't matter at all. The only thing that matters is a single test, and that's simply wrong.
Right. Now explain what a complaint could lead to. I mean, you make a complaint, what would you like the feds to do?
Well, we'd like the U.S. Department of Education to open an investigation and to require the New York City Department of Education to actually demonstrate that this process has some validity, because it certainly hasn't done so in the 40+ years that this policy has been in place. We also like the Department of Education to determine, as we have found, that this policy actually has a racially disparate impact on African American and Latino students, and further that the policy isn't educationally sound at all, and then require the Department of Ed to change this policy.
Renee, you get the picture. You went to Stuyvesant. You're part of a group that alumni who help students, minority students to get in, black students to get in, right?
Correct.
So what do you make of this complaint and centering the problem on this single test? Is that barking up the right tree?
Yes and no. I mean, I take a look at the complaint, and a lot of what it has to say is quite valid. I think I disagree slightly with placing the blame for the disparate numbers on the test itself. I think as an African American woman who took the test and have a bunch of compadres who took the test and passed and got into Stuyvesant and Brooklyn Tech and Bronx Science, that it's not the test. Basically, kids can sit and take this test and pass. I think that...
But they don't.
Well, they don't, because I think the issue is that the city of New York and the state is not really giving kids the level of education they need before they get to the test. That's giving them the preparation. And so what you see is people kind of filling the gap with private test prep and private tutoring. And if you can't afford that, then you're not going to do well on this test. And the disparate impact is on those African American and Latinos and low-income students who can't afford to make up that education gap.
Damon, what do you think of that argument?
Well, I agree that there's certainly inequities in K-8 education. The city's elementary and middle schools certainly have some continuing problems, so we agree in that respect. But one thing we have to clarify is this: there is no way to pass or fail this exam. In fact, the placement based upon a test is based solely upon how high you can score on the test. All 28,000 or so test takers have their scores listed in rank order from highest to lowest. And what that means is that they're fairly arbitrary cutoffs. A score that would get you into Stuyvesant this year may not get you in next year, and the score that got you in last year may not get you in this year. It's completely arbitrary because there is no certified valid cutoff score that demonstrates or indicates that a student has particular knowledge. It's simply a race to see who can score the highest, and that's what test prep comes.
So would you, so test prep can help, but would you rather see something more like the way you get into college, which is they check your SAT scores, they check your grades, but they also check, what your service to the community, how involved you've been, many facets of you and your personality that they think might be predictive of how well you'll do in college.
Well, a review of an entire file of considering the whole person is certainly important. New York City, however, doesn't even consider other objective indicators of academic merit. So, for example, grades and the mandated state test scores that students must take in elementary school and middle school. None of that actually matters at all. So New York could do a lot by actually taking a small step in considering true academic merit. Because
that might rule out bad test takers too, right?
Well, I think that's fine. I think the city should definitely make an effort to have a high school that takes those multi-factor criteria into account. I don't think that school has to be Stuyvesant. I think that can be a
or the 7 others.
Or the 7 others. There can be, just like they created the additional schools, there can be another school that looks at multi-factor analysis. There can be a school based on the system in the University of Texas that takes the top 5% from, the 8th graders across the city. I think the city needs to do more to have different models.
But by this logic, though, it sounds like you're saying that people who do really well on this test, that somehow it's a pure meritocracy.
Oh, no, I'm not saying that at all.
Well, it sounds that way because
you're not all students are coming to the test equally prepared. They're not coming to it with the same backgrounds. They're not coming to it with the same level of education. The city is not providing.
Yeah, but given how they are, their level of knowledge, you're saying as it is now, without test prep or leveling the playing field somehow, or or training these minority kids. You're saying as it stands now, of the thousands who walk in and take this test, the best people are being chosen.
No, I don't think I think in any educational system, it's not always the best people that are being chosen, whether it's the high school level or the college level. There are qualified students that are denied admission every day. I mean, what these numbers are a factor of is supply and demand. If you have X number of seats and X number of students trying to vie for those seats, you're going to have an issue. We see it in the gifted and talented programs where 5,000 students qualified, and now the city's saying, we can't educate all 5,000. We have to now change the test so that fewer people are passing it. So it's kind of the city's dedication to educating and preparing all the students that can get in and can have access to a higher level education.
And that's exactly why we have to change the process, not just at the other 7 schools, but also at Stuyvesant. People in this city, some of them are under the illusion that somehow we shouldn't mess with these schools. We shouldn't change what they consider a good thing. The problem is they're ignoring the fact that there are hundreds, if not thousands of students each year who are more than qualified, even despite some of the disparities in the lower grades, who are more than qualified to succeed at these schools. But they're not getting in simply because of the test. Now, if the New York City Department of Education were to bring in experts and conduct an actual study, which is never done, in the history of this exam, if it would actually conduct a study and determine what does it really mean, then we would have a ground zero to talk from. The problem is the test, as we understand it now, predicts nothing. And so focusing on test prep simply isn't the answer.
Yeah, this is too abstract for me. What could a study show about a test that would be unfair? What do you think is in there?
It's not about unfairness of the test. And to be clear, we're not alleging that the test is somehow culturally biased. It could very well be, but that's not our allegation. Our allegation is that the test neither recognizes past true academic merit, nor does it predict future academic success.
All right, so you would maybe want it scrapped altogether and have a different kind of test that would show, let's say, a person's achievement in some area besides strictly the way this exam is set up.
Either
that
scrap
would reflect
the test,
their grades in a different way?
Scrap the test, revise the test, but the most important thing is what you said earlier, which is to actually consider multiple measures, multiple criteria. There is no selective college or university that we know of in this country that bases admission solely on an SAT score, for example. All of these institutions actually consider other factors in the file, at the very least grades. At the very least,
do either of you worry that simply by objecting to the test, that people will think, oh, look, these minority kids want special treatment. This is affirmative action coming up again. They're not doing as well in the test, so they want to change the test. Don't you worry about a kind of backfiring?
Well, actually, we actually welcome the discussion and debate, part of what we're doing today. But what we understand is this. The process that we're talking about, the changes, will not only make things fairer for African American and Latino students, but for all students. There are white working, middle class working families who are struggling through these issues as well. We have complainants and also letters of support from Asian American organizations, now 5 of them, who are on board with us and say, this process is not fair, despite what you may think about the model minority myth.
It was interesting, there was this article in the Times, you probably read it recently, about minority kids getting along or not getting along or feeling lonely or disconnected in the city's private schools, and all these films being made about that problem. But what struck me about that piece in the Times was the high percentage of minority kids at fancy schools like Dalton and other schools, 30%. They've poured a lot of money into it. Originally those kids were all on scholarship, now they've pushed very hard to get middle class kids who are full paying. It seems like the public high schools are left in the dust here.
Well, that's one of the problems with the numbers at Stuyvesant, is that you have competition for those minority students that are high scorers. The private schools are coming in and kind of picking them out of the system, whether it's New York private schools or whether it's tests for prep and ABC programs, all these other programs that are coming in and kind of siphoning students off from Stuyvesant. You have classmates of mine who went to Stuyvesant, African American, and have a choice to whether or not they're going to send their kids to Stuyvesant or a private school, and say, because of the diversity issue, I'd rather send my kid to a more diverse private school. So
yes,
those kids are getting siphoned off from the process.
Right, so with this, what your complaint might tend to equal this out a little bit, right?
Well, it certainly could, and I think that the siphoning could be part of a phenomenon, but we certainly shouldn't use that to let the city or the state off the hook here, because the State Department of Education is in play here as a respondent to this complaint as well. Here's the thing that we wonder. If these private schools can identify completely qualified and talented Black and Latino students, why cannot New York City schools do the same thing? And so really there's no good answer that the city has come up with to respond to that question today.
Yes, interesting. And finally, let me just ask you, I know that the federal government really moves at a glacial clip, so I was wondering when you would hear something back about this complaint.
Well, it's not entirely clear. The federal government does move at its own pace, but if you've read our complaint, it's available at our website, www.naacpldf.org. It's a substantial complaint that lays out not just the factual background, but also the legal analysis and an analysis of the educational research.
You want to say that URL more slowly?
Sure. It's NAACPLDF.org.
LDF.org.
Got it.
Good. Thank you, both of you, for coming.
Thank you.
Very helpful. Up next, an app that makes encrypting your conversations so easy that the federal government is a little concerned about it. Joseph Heller, author of Catch-22, wrote, "Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they aren't after you." I think our next guest would agree. Whether you're a celebrity who just got her iPhone hacked for personal photos, someone who mistakenly shares trade secrets over a hacked email account, or you're a victim of identity theft, Silent Circle is here to help. Mike Jenke is an ex-Navy SEAL who now finds himself and his colleagues at Silent Circle defending a product whose time has come, one that puts military-grade encrypted phone calls, text messages, and video chats quite literally into the hands of anyone with a smartphone. Welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Explain what this software does. It nestles up to other software, right?
Yes, sir. We have basically a series of apps and a secure calling plan and an email, a text app, an encrypted mobile phone, video, and voice on it, and a desktop kind of like Skype, if you will.
Right. And what's it allow me to do that I can't do right now?
Well, it allows you to actually talk to anybody in the world who has that app completely end-to-end, which means it's encrypted out of your iPhone and it's only decrypted by that other person. And when that call's done, the keys are deleted.
Really? And yeah, that makes it hard to do research on what the code is because the code evaporates each time you use it,
exactly right?
Exactly. And is this easy for me or any ordinary person to get?
Yes, it is. We designed them to be just on the App Store, just like you're used to. It looks just like your normal apps. We have Android coming out in a little later, and it's meant to make what Phil Zimmerman calls curated crypto.
Who's Phil Zimmerman? What did he invent?
Well, Phil Zimmerman was inducted into the Hall of Fame. He's the
wait, whose Hall of Fame was it?
The Internet Hall of Fame.
Oh, there, I didn't know. Okay.
He's the creator of PGP encryption, which is basically the world standard of encryption.
Right.
And they call it the crypto wars of the '90s, where the federal government tried to stop this from getting out, but he prevailed, and today encryption is part of everything you do, and rightfully so.
Right, and he's a privacy crusader.
He is, and we have John Callis, who's the inventor of Apple's whole disk encryption, and kind of like my daughter says, the Avengers A-team
right.
of crypto and security.
Right, now how'd you get into this, and what has Hollywood got to do with it?
Well, Hollywood doesn't have much to do with it, but I spent a lot of times in the SEAL teams, and then after that, I started a logistics, construction, and security firm working for the U.S., NATO, in all over the world. And the problem began that everybody started to bring their own device, something today called BYOD.
Bring your own device.
That's right. The days of you traveling with your Lockheed-issued BlackBerry were over. You had your own iPad, your Android, your iPhone, and there was no way to secure it. On top of it, even third world nation states and criminal gangs can grab your stuff right out of the air.
Right.
And there was
so there's
no
tremendous demand there.
Yes, there was no commercial service that could do what we're doing.
Right, so businesses are your clients. Who else?
Yes, sir. Well, we have special operation units around the world and governments. We have huge amount of privacy advocates and businesses protecting their intellectual property. I mean, if you're trying to do business in China or India today and you don't have encryption, you're not doing business correctly.
Right. When you were part of SEAL Team 6, right?
That's correct.
So you were used to any communication device you had was totally encrypted, right?
For the most part, but what a lot of people don't understand is that the technology evolved so quickly that you couldn't go across borders in your blue jeans and a t-shirt with some special phone, because even third world country customs could now detect it. So how do you communicate to your wife and family and conduct business, even if you're a businessman? There wasn't anything. So this lack, this void for both enterprise, governments, as well as just private individuals. I mean, today, even in New York City, you got fashion designers who are using our products simply because their designs are getting stolen and show up on the streets of Bangladesh a week later.
Right. If there's anything that's more secret in the world than SEAL Team 6, it's 34th Street and the fashion industry.
There you go.
So explain this to me. Is this something, for example, that you would welcome Occupy Wall Street to use? Because, they would like to have a private way to say, to communicate. They had problems with that when they were trying to organize. They felt the police were, knew exactly what they were doing, and they wanted to be effective, protesters of Wall Street.
Absolutely. This is designed for the citizens of the world. And it's not our job to be the judge and jury. A lot of people say, well, this could be used by bad guys around the world. We know it will. It's human nature. 1% will use something for bad. But you can't regulate and penalize 99% of the people that are trying to protect intellectual property, a banker to you, government that's trying to communicate on their own devices.
Right. Well, the government also needs to hack into people and find out who is trying to blow up Lower Manhattan. So isn't there some kind of regulations, I think it's called CALIA, that says you have to leave a back door open in your software so the government can get in and overlook it, even if it's privacy software. Does that apply to you? Are you resisting it?
No, sir, it doesn't apply to us. We're a VoIP, a voice over the internet protocol company, utilizing an existing phone and apps. So CALIA, as it's written, does not apply to companies like ours.
Right. Do you have the acronym, what it stands for, off the top of your head?
CALIA?
Yeah.
I'm sure I do. I did not.
I often ask this, and it doesn't matter.
It's
but
the Communications
Assistance Law Enforcement
Act.
Yeah.
That's correct.
It
And it applies to telecommunications firms.
Right.
And the reason that's a very bad thing for what our communication does, if you try to put a back door into something like this, it's shown today that back doors are exploitable by the Chinese, by criminal gangs, by hackers. So the special operation units and law enforcement, governments, and businesses around the world that are using our service, if you try to regulate a back door, you've just made them more vulnerable.
Right. Okay. So now, next level question is, you guys designed this. You know about it. So if I have this and I'm communicating with somebody about a business thing I want to keep private, let's say something that's been patented, it seems to me I have to trust you guys not to hack into it.
That's a great point. Well, the answer is you don't have to trust us. That's why we designed it. We designed it, we built a multi-million-dollar network, but we designed this so that it encrypts it on your device, and only you and the person you're calling have the keys. So the Chinese, criminal gangs, we could try to grab it out of the air, and all we have is encrypted gobbledygook. Someone has to get your device, your iPad, your phone, the other person's, to actually see what was on it. But if it's a phone call or a video, it's completely gone anyways. So you don't have to trust. That's the beauty of why this is such a huge thing all over the world that people are talking about.
Is this open source? Can anybody look at the code of this app?
Yes, sir. We're in the process of releasing it open source. It's going to take us some time to do that because we have so much of it, and we have to parse that out the way it is done. So yes, people will be able to look at it. It's already being audited and peer reviewed around the world. Two of the encryption modules that we use, of course, were invented by Phil Zerman and John Callis. They've been out and reviewed for 10, 20 years. But our actual source code of the products, we're releasing open source.
Now, maybe you have to be a techie to understand this, but if everybody, like most open source, is so that anybody can contribute to it, improve it, help it, doesn't that in some way make it open and make it open the window so that anybody can also hack into it?
No, the way open source works is you can look at it and you can review it and see that it does everything it needs to do, but how that integrates with the encryption and off of our network, they're not going to be able to hack that. See, that's how you can look at encryption and peer review it, and people go, yeah, it's unbreakable. So you can look at it, but it doesn't mean you can reverse engineer it. Does that make sense? It's like putting something in a blender, what comes out doesn't mean you can reconstruct a tomato.
Yes, I get that, and I've tried that, and it just can't be done. Explain to me something else about this. Has the government come to you at some point, at some level, and said, we don't like this?
No. As a matter of fact, it's been even much different than we thought the reception would be. Because we have 2 SEALs and 3 ex-British SAS Special Forces in our unique tribe, we call it, they're able to come in and look and go, okay, can we sit down and ask what's going on? Sure.
Maybe they're scared of you.
No, I don't think they're scared of us. Actually, they're adopting it across the board.
Right. They certainly can't doubt your patriotism.
No, and that's not something that we wanted to put at risk. This is for the citizens of the world, and we also wanted to understand the other side of the table. But it gives them a tool, because studies today show that the 70% issue of a liability is everybody's personal device. So even the government employees and law enforcement are talking about work on their personal device. There's nothing that can secure it.
So where do we get this? We're just about out of time.
At the App Store or at our website.
And what's it called? What do I search for in the App Store?
Silent mail, silent text, or silent phone.
Right, and what's it cost?
It costs $20 a month for all 4 of those: email, video, voice, and text.
And when is it coming? When does it come out for Android?
It comes out for Android in about 40 days.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you, sir.
Finally tonight, can you help us with a crowdsourcing project? The goal is to make a citywide map of cash machines so you don't get gouged. I am sure you have had an experience like this guy. You're in a hurry and hungry, but you failed to hit your bank ATM this morning. Yeah, we can see it's empty. But there's the answer. Cash machine right next door. The good news? It takes every kind of plastic. The bad news? The ATM is hungry too. It charges twice the price of a slice just to hand you your own money. No way. What this fellow needs is a map of ATMs showing the different fees in different places so we can easily find an affordable ATM. And that's precisely what CUNY's NY City News, New York City News Service, is building with our help. It's a crowdsourcing project of the CUNY Grad School of Journalism. We're asking you to check out some ATMs that are not associated with a bank. The more the better. No need to take money out. Just note the fee, the location, and the ATM company, and report your findings to the website below, NY City News Service. We will analyze the data and post an interactive map when it's done, and we'll show it to you right here on the program. In case you are squinting at the URL below, the site to report your ATM info is nycitynewsservice.com. And that is our show for this week. We roll out a new program each Wednesday evening at 7:30. Do tune in to Brian Lehrer's radio program each weekday at 10 a.m. on WNYC 93.9 FM and AM 820. I'm Marty Goldenson filling in for Brian. Thanks for watching.